Hey, if you've been considering getting something from Kilohearts, click on the affiliate link below and type in Alckemy in the coupon section for 10%. What's good, everybody? Welcome to the Noez bass. This is something that I've used in several of my tracks, and I'm actually really excited to do a video over it. For one, it's great to document what I've been doing, and two, like, this is just a dope bass. I like it a lot. It's actually the bass that I used in the intro of my new intro or whatever. So the premise behind this actually isn't a Reese. I'm actually doing FM stuff and then kind of just doing my typical filter processing, which I'll walk you guys through. But if this is your first time to the channel and you're interested in this kind of bass, then consider dropping a subscription and checking out my website for all of the stuff I have to offer. There's a bunch of free stuff. So with all that out of the way, let's jump into Phaseplant. I'm going to turn all this stuff off and we will talk about the patch. So first things first, what I have here is just an analog oscillator that is just a sine wave. There's an FM that's coming through this from wavetable 4. You can use any wavetable, to be honest. It's just, you know, apply a little bit of FM to kind of get your growliness. If I turn all of these off, this is what the sound is: vanilla. Just kind of something that sounds like a square. And then one thing that I'm doing is adding a little bit of distortion and having a little bit of noise on here as well. One thing that I started to do early on that I've actually ended up doing a lot lately whenever I'm designing basses is adding a pitch drop or a pitch bend at the beginning of the sound. So no matter what I do, it's always going to kind of have that kind of kick that comes in, and you just want to set that to not be super long, just a nice easy attack with, like, what is this at? With 94 milliseconds of decay. The other thing that I've done is set up an LFO on this as well, and this is just kind of oscillating between about 0.60 cents, so that way it's kind of coming up and down. And then there's a randomizer up here that is actually creating vibrato. On the random stuff here, we basically have some randomizers that's kind of cycling through our wavetables. You can kind of see that there, but that's pretty much it for the main oscillator patch. So next up, we just have a 3-band EQ that's just boosting some of the low and high end. And then we've got a bit crusher that's also kind of stagnant. This is kind of just a setting that I thought sounded good. It's at 21K, and then you can copy the settings. Now, the next thing that I do is basically something that I've been practicing a lot of, just finding out different ways to frequency split bands and apply different filtering to. But the most consistent thing that I found is adding a high pass on a low band, and then also adding a notch and band pass on either the mid or the mid-high band XYZ. So you'll notice that I also have a stereo width that is putting the bottom end in mono, but you don't necessarily have to. It's just something that I prefer to do. A lot of the choices here are all creative and just listening to how it sounds and seeing if I personally like it or not. So don't think that you have to do anything that I'm doing within this. So the filter with one of the recent updates with Phaseplant is amazing because we now have the option to do filter slopes. So that basically means that we can do really wide and narrow notches, and that's what these two randomizers are doing. And if you didn't know, there's the randomized LFO on curved and then also kind of like step mode, I guess. And so basically what I've done is just pit these two against each other and then kind of move them around the frequency range with randomizers. So that's where the movement is coming from. The next thing that I've done is added a disperser. It's just hitting at F2 because that's pretty much what I make all my music in. And then we have a stagnant chorus and a stagnant phaser. After that, we've got a compressor. You can just kind of copy the settings. And then at the bottom, I'm using one of the same LFOs to kind of automate the mix. So that way it'll kind of do some cool filtering and then open itself completely back up so we still get to hear some of the main sound. Whenever you do some really heavy filtering, sometimes it's a good idea to reintroduce some distortion. You don't always have to, but in this case, I thought it was a good idea. And then I've introduced another filter that's also another notch that's relatively consistent. And you'll notice that, like, with a lot of these like monster growly sounds, it's really just creating as chunky of a waveform as you can and like cutting heavily into the sound with a bunch of different filters and then trying to figure out some way at the end to correct it. But pretty much it for most of the basses or stuff that I do. So the next thing is an interesting thing that I kind of haven't seen anybody else do. I'm not saying I made it up, I'm just saying I haven't seen anybody else do it. But basically what I do is I use the stereo turbo here with an LFO to kind of pan the signal left and right. And then I end up going into a stereo and turning it into mono. I just deleted it by accident, or relatively mono. And what you end up getting is a really cool flanging sound. Hopefully you can tell the difference. It's really prominent with typical Reese's and stuff, but this is something that is super duper cool, and I think that more people will adopt it as they become aware of it. So the last two things are just some corrections with heavy compression, like a pretty low threshold, turning the makeup up, and then trying to make it as loud as I can push it with a limiter, where the only thing that I do here is just turn up the gain. And that's pretty much the vanilla sound, quote unquote. So onto the processing from here, the next thing I've got is what I do pretty much with all my basses. I've got a notch at 85 Hertz, and then I'm kind of sweeping the lows and mids with this LFO. And you can see that even though I'm blowing the sound out, we're still getting some really cool vocal movement on the low end. So to kind of mitigate that, we're sending this into a vocoder, and this, again, this is just kind of my default preset setting. Nothing's being modulated, and that's pretty much that. Then we have some distortion. That's just tape saturation. So the next thing here is a notch filter that's just being randomized on the high mids. I think that we have another one that's doing the same thing at a lower frequency range. Nice. Then the next thing that I have is something that I talked about in all my videos, which is our triple band split of a high pass on the low end, mid band on the mid band, or sorry, band pass on the mid band, and then a low pass on the high band. And then there's a automator, or sorry, randomizer that is messing with the mix here. So next up, we're taking a lot of highs out, so we're going to reintroduce some of that with an OTT. Just looks like this. I have turned up the time, probably because there's some kind of like resonances or something that's cutting through after I stop playing the sound. So if you turn the time up, it will kind of act as a pseudo transient shaper. Next up, I have some saturation. Sounds nice. Then I'm kind of soothing everything out, no pun intended, especially on the high ends. It looks just like that. And then finally, we've got our corrective means, which is making sure that our low end is in mono, nothing's on the top, and then taking a look at some EQ, which I'm just cutting everything below 20 Hertz and then dipping around the fundamental right here, just to kind of like not be too prominent. After that, we're just going to compress the heck out of it with a glue compressor, really low threshold, some nice makeup, and that's pretty much it. As you can tell when you listen to this, you're going to get a lot of mud, and that's totally fine because it's randomizing it back and forth in between. And so if you make something like this, you might have a bunch of those moments that just sound like overblown, but if you kind of play with some of the pitch bending and stuff, then sometimes you can end up getting some really cool stuff. Like that last hit, that whump, like one of my favorite sounds ever. And again, don't worry so much about trying to copy the patch exactly. I just wanted to show you a process about how to achieve some similar sounds. That's pretty much it for me, guys. And be sure to check out the website and stuff. Much love to you all. I'll see you later.